GM. So, trade of the day, I'll compare Bitcoin and ETH. So, Bitcoin it's put in this nice long wick after flushing down below the most recent daily low, taking out a bunch of stops, open interest declining, and from there you would say potentially a local bottom. Like I mentioned, it might squeeze down a little bit to panic people and then push up to fill in a gap. But if there is going to be another bounce soon and there's going to be like a July rally, I think Ethereum probably has a better setup for it. If you let's look at liquidations, and then we've got the open interest on, and ETH had big liquidations relatively, especially 2 days in a row, right? So each day on ETH here is individually not the biggest it's had, but cumulatively for those 2 day spell, it's bigger than here. It's obviously smaller than that 2 day event. It's bigger than that single day. It's bigger than that single day. It's bigger than that single day, right? So as a 2 day move, there were some significant liquidations on ETH. And I talked about this for how long? I've talked about this for ages, where ETH had, taken out, right? So that it went below those lows. So it's taken out all those stops at the lows. It is down into support, which is why I think ETH probably has structurally a better setup here than Bitcoin for the next bounce. Because whereas Bitcoin went below and has stayed below support, ETH is kind of at support. And if you're going to see a squeeze back up, and obviously ETH ETFs are launching soon, you might get a little rally up into it. There might be a bounce there to be had for ETH. The way I would frame that would be there's a similar type of move that's worth, I think, comparing. Or if you zoom out here on ETH, right, and we look at this move here, ETH, there, it didn't. I'm just trying to see which. Most of them double bottomed. Yeah, spot exchanges did take out lows. Just taking a look here. Spot exchanges, yeah. Let's look at the aggregate chart. Aggregate chart went right down and did just take out the lows. So yeah. So when you aggregate the chart for ETH, you can see that it's taken out those lows, right? And there's a few different paths it can take from here. If I take off this and this, and I can put that volume profile on later on. But the thing I want to look at here is it's a little bit like Bitcoin after FTX collapse, where you see this, right? So you had a previous support level, wicks right down through it. So Bitcoin, not FTX, sorry. I'll show you this now. I'll explain it in a sec. Over here. It's a little bit like this move. Was that the one? Or was it ETH? Hold on, let me see. Which is the move I was talking about? No. Right. It is this move. It's actually two different moves. So the BTC move I was actually talking about was this one. So you've got two different moves here. So you got this move on BTC, which flushed down, took out all those stops, right? And it looked like it was probably a bottom. So it came down, took out all those stops, looks like it's a bottom. And then obviously that was in the midst of the FTX collapse, and it went immediately lower and then ranged below it, okay? Ranged below that level, I wasn't able to get back above it for a couple of months, and then it went back above, okay? So that's one path you'd be looking at. That would be like Ethereum basically over this weekend going lower and then having to reaccumulate below that level before moving back up. That's one. But I don't see an FTX collapse, obviously, that type of move coming here in the near term. So I actually think it's going to be more similar to this interim move here, where we had a flush down. It took out those range lows and came back to the lows, and then it allowed a bounce back to fill in some of the previous inefficiency, which for ETH, to me, would look something like this. It's taken out that level, chop around, move up into this area, and then back down, right? And so the trade that I like, and the reason I like Ethereum more on that perspective, like I said, is because it's at support, Bitcoin's below support, and if Bitcoin, consolidates and doesn't go lower in the near term, it's probably Ethereum with a stronger support initially to have a move back towards this breakdown point, and there could be a decent trade to be had in there. If you're looking at the lower end range, so this is ETH in its previous lower end consolidation. So throughout all of this distribution here, Ethereum set a value area at here from the high to the low. We obviously wick down through it. We're back inside. So we're at the value area low. You got the point of control here. And I think that on lower time frames, if ETH is able to hold, if we make this bigger and look in here, we zoom in. If you're able to see Ethereum flipping this structure, so I would imagine it pushes up, back down. If it reclaims and holds, that's when I could see Ethereum having a move up and trending up towards that level. So you're looking at almost exactly 3K, which is the round number as well. I'd expect probably some chop above, chop below. If you look at the 4-hour bands, they're still wide apart. So you have a push up, touching the top band, usually rejects off that, reaccumulates, pushes back up, and that's when it starts to get above the bands, and that's when the bands are starting to then compress and go towards a crossover, right? And then you're looking at this, where at the end point, the bands themselves are going green on the 4-hour, and that's where Ethereum is a catalyst to push towards those highs. Probably sometime around the lead up to the ETFs going live, I guess, if you see the market holding and recovering, right? Just filling in the overextended downtrend. Probably first, there's going to be several more days of chop, and maybe there's a catalyst around there with CPI. We know that CPI can often cause catalysts in the near term. That would line up with it, because CPI is probably going to be on Wednesday or Thursday of next week, as it's always in the second week of the month. If we go and look at CPI for next week, CPI is going to be on Thursday, 11th, right? That might be the time if we do see price holding and it gets above that 3K and it's consolidating. I think that's probably a good time for if we get good inflation numbers, which means if inflation cools down even more, you might see that as a spur to get up to that level there, which then probably retraces all the way back down, and then that could be a bottom starting to form on ETH, and that would be like if Bitcoin's able to form a bottom in the high 50s as well, right? Now that could also, by the way, all of this could just be part of a redistribution before a final sweep of the lows, before the actual bottom. If you're looking at that as maybe like the spring doesn't happen until later on, this also would align with the Fed meeting in September, which might be when they start cutting rates. So maybe the inflation numbers or something around that gives you a catalyst for pump. We retrace it. Then the Fed meeting in 31st of July is over here, and people are expecting, maybe there's going to be a cut. Then there's no cut. We bleed down. Then they get a cut in September, and it goes up. Right? That's obviously very speculative path, and I don't really care about this second part. I do think this first part has a decent probability. First thing I'd want to see, touching the top band and rejecting below it, then reclaiming 3K. So if ETH hits the top band on the 4-hour, then goes lower, then reclaims 3K, that's where I'd look to start building along with a target of 3,400. And your trade there then would be trading it from around 3K, getting your stop in below, there'd have to be a market structure level set, and targeting up towards 34. That's the wrong way, it's a short. It would be like this, right? That's the rough kind of trade I'll be looking at. Obviously, we don't know what the structure levels are, But that would be what I'd have in mind over the next week to 10 days if price action develops. So that's probably the main thing I'm looking at right now. And that's it. GM, GM, GM.